Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started.
Gravitas, presented by Amity University, ranked amongst the top 3% universities globally. Co-powered by Star Health Insurance, the health insurance specialist.
改革开放以来，按照现行贫困标准计算，我国7.7亿农村贫困人口摆脱贫困。
保持生活是吧？我也是60-70岁了，老婆也是60多岁了，是吧？我们也不能这么做了，做不像样了。
仍然任重道远。
China has made a new claim. It has no poor people. Its leader Xi Jinping says it's a miracle that they've pulled 800 million people out of extreme poverty, 10 million people every year. He's patting himself on the back for this achievement and he's asking the world to learn from him. We would like to congratulate China and its leader, but there's a small matter of facts. They do not agree with Xi Jinping. Numbers and data was never China's strong suit, you see. From Wuhan virus cases to GDP figures to the number of poor, China can't seem to count properly. So on Gravitas tonight, we'll examine what the numbers say. Poverty is China's latest scam. That's what they say. China has changed the rules to declare itself free of extreme poverty. We'll also look at why Beijing is so desperate to make such a tall claim right now. What is it trying to deflect attention from? We'll discuss. Also on the show tonight, Turkey targets India again over the Kashmir issue at the United Nations. India fires back, says Turkey should first look at its own record. Facebook, WhatsApp and Twitter will face tougher rules in India now. The government has issued new social media guidelines. We'll bring you the highlights. A London court has ordered Nirav Modi's extradition to India. Does it mean it's a done deal? How soon can he be brought back to India? We'll try to answer those questions. And Sri Lanka is under the scanner over human rights violations. 18 countries have reportedly vowed to support it at the UNHRC. Is India one of them? We'll tell you. We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has accused the military of an attempted coup after the top military officials demanded his resignation over the handling of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. Following months of protests against his rule, Pashinyan marched through the streets of the capital, Yerevan, with his supporters saying that the situation is tense, but there cannot be clashes. According to a joint statement, India and Pakistan have agreed to strictly observe all agreements on ceasefire along the line of control and other sectors from midnight of the 24th of February. The decision was taken at a discussion between the Director Generals of Military Operations of India and Pakistan. The Myanmar junta's foreign minister visited Thailand on Wednesday as regional powers tried to broker an end to 3 weeks of deadly unrest triggered by a military coup. The foreign minister, WION, held talks with his counterparts from Thailand and Indonesia. India's Commerce and Industry Minister Piyush Goyal has said that 57 nations are now backing an India-led proposal at the World Trade Organization for waiver of trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights on COVID-19 vaccines. The joint proposal by India and South Africa aims at equitable access to medicines and other products during the COVID-19 pandemic. "23 people are believed to be trapped after an illegal gold mine in Indonesia's Sulawesi island collapsed. A search and rescue effort has been launched. 15 have been rescued from the debris so far, while 3 bodies of women miners have been recovered. Italy paid its last respects to its ambassador to Congo, who was killed in an attack on Monday. Ambassador Luca Attanasio and his bodyguard were attacked while traveling in a United Nations convoy during a fact-finding mission. NASA has released the first 360-degree panoramic view of Mars. The images were taken by the Perseverance rover on a mission to search for signs of ancient microscopic life. A forest fire in a rural area of central Japan burned for the 4th day. More than 200 households have been ordered to evacuate. Footage showed smoke billowing upward from the hills, with a military helicopter dropping water on the area. Manchester City have put one foot in the quarterfinals of the UEFA Champions League with a 2-0 first leg victory over Germans Borussia Mönchengladbach. Bernardo Silva and Gabriel Jesus scored in either half in Budapest as City extended their winning streak to 19 straight matches. Elsewhere, 13-time champions Real Madrid edged 10-man Atalanta 1-0 courtesy of a late goal from Ferland Mendy.
No evidence of any impairment whatsoever.
Tiger Woods will not be charged by Los Angeles County Police for the car crash, which left him requiring multiple surgeries on his right leg. Woods had to be extricated from his car following the high-speed crash on Tuesday morning. But the sheriff's office has confirmed that he was not driving under influence and that the case was being treated as an accident. Woods continues to recover at an LA hospital.
689 million people in this world live in extreme poverty. 689 million. They earn less than $1.9 a day. 9.2% of the people in this world live below the poverty line. But none of them lives in China. It is the world's most populated country and it has no poor people. China is home to 1.4 billion people and all of them live above the line of extreme poverty, or so it claims.
We have finished the arduous task of eradicating absolute poverty and created a miracle that shall go down in history.
What Xi Jinping just referred to as a miracle is actually a mirage. It's an illusion, a lie. Our cover story tonight is from China, and we will tell you in less than 5 minutes why Xi Jinping's claims of eradicating extreme poverty is a bluff. Let's start by listing out what the president and his party claim. 1. That China has brought 800 million people out of extreme poverty. 2. 10 million people were lifted out of poverty every year in China. 3. In the last 8 years, 98.99 million rural residents were lifted out of poverty. Claim number 4. 832 impoverished countries have been removed from the poverty list. Number 5. 128,000 villages have been removed from the poverty list. Number 6. China spent 1.6 trillion yuan or $246 billion on eradicating poverty. Point number 7. 1,800 workers lost their lives while trying to eradicate poverty. Xi Jinping calls this a quote-unquote China example, one that he recommends developing countries adopt.
China has won an overall victory in the fight against poverty on the significant occasion of greeting the 100th anniversary of the foundation of the CPC, a victory won after concerted efforts from the whole party and the Chinese people of all ethnic groups.
So that was some fiction. Now let's get to facts. Forget eradicating poverty. There's a problem with China's very definition of poverty. Who is poor? China has changed the criterion and the definition. And based on its new definition, China claims to have eradicated poverty. Let me show you how. The World Bank says anyone who earns less than $1.9 a day lives in extreme poverty. But China has brought that mark lower. It says anyone who earns less than $1.69 a day is poor. This may seem like a minor change, but it makes a major difference when you look at the big picture. So based on this new threshold, China says it has no poor. The World Bank draws the poverty line for an upper middle income country at $5.5 a day. China is an upper middle income country, so that line should be $5.5 a day according to the World Bank. It is the world's second largest economy. But look at China's poverty line, $2.25 a day. Half the World Bank's threshold. China has changed the goalpost to claim victory.
Shaking off poverty is not the finish line, but the starting point of a new life and a new endeavor.
China claims to have won a race by changing its finish line. The world first pledged to end extreme poverty in 1996. This was during the World Food Summit in Rome. China says it has completed this task in just 26 years. By now, you know it's all a lie. The question is why? What explains China's desperation? This man, Xi Jinping. You see, eradicating poverty has been one of Xi's dream projects. Since coming to power in 2012, he has been pressing on this. In November 2013, he put forward the concept of targeted poverty alleviation. In 2015, he vowed to eradicate extreme poverty. He set a 2020 goal. He sent officials knocking on every door in rural China asking families about their income. Billions of dollars were then poured in, roads were constructed, schools and factories were built, many residents of rural areas were forced to relocate, farmers were forced to grow certain crops. Now, we do not know if Xi's policy helped anyone, but there are many who have horror stories to tell. We found one of them, orange farmer Liu Qingyu. This is what he said.
I'm nearly 70 and my wife is over 60. We cannot work like this. Our living is in such a poor shape. After the road was built, we harvested a lot of oranges. Then, after a few years, they cut the orange trees down and built a tea plant, which reduced the farmer's income quite a lot.
There's a big difference between Xi's poverty eradication claims and the ground reality in China. Targeted poverty alleviation killed the dreams of many citizens. It also forced people to take up unsustainable jobs. The factories, the employment, the roads, they were all built on government money. Experts say none of it is sustainable. It's a bubble waiting to burst. These people will soon be out of jobs. This is the projection. But Xi Jinping is bent on painting a different story for the world. Even before the turn of the calendar, the president announced that China had eradicated extreme poverty. Then came the gala at the Great Hall of People, the medals and the honors. What was the need for this spectacle? The answer lies in the headlines. China is trying to shift global attention. What from? From the Uyghur crackdown, the genocide. From the United States to Canada, the UK and the EU, the world is calling out China on the Uyghur genocide. Here's reason number 2, the Wuhan virus pandemic, one that killed more than 2.5 million people and counting. The poverty eradication claim is Xi Jinping's attempt to celebrate China and also sell the China model abroad.
China has created an example of poverty reduction and governance and has made significant contributions to the global cause of poverty reduction.
This is China's latest lie to the world. Xi Jinping is using the country's poor for a PR stunt. But he's not alone in doing so. Defeating poverty is the ultimate dream of every politician. Or at least that's what they say. Many leaders have waged a war on poverty. But it's always been a war of rhetoric. Tall claims and promises that people forget after a few years. The world has enough resources to beat this menace, but it continues to fester. Tens of thousands are still born into poverty every year. Our next report tells you what's ailing the global war on poverty.
This administration today, here and now, declares unconditional war on poverty in America.
It was America's most popular war, also one of its most resounding defeats. In their defense, it was the perfect slogan. War made it seem like a precisely planned mission, and poverty was the perfect villain. In the next 50 years, America did become rich, but many Americans remained poor. A few years later, in 1971, Indira Gandhi gave a similar election slogan in India. It said Garibi Hatao, meaning remove poverty. It remained just a slogan. The world soon joined this war, possibly the only time when global interests converged. All the resources in the world available at their fingertips. Yet, poverty lingered. Today, nearly 10% of the world lives in poverty. That's more than 700 million people. Helping them is not beyond our joint efforts. It's not the means that is lacking, but the will. Poverty is the result of multiple factors, most of them within human control. In the barren wastes of sub-Saharan Africa and the malaria-infected jungles of West Africa, war perpetrates poverty. Without peace, poverty alleviation is not possible. It becomes difficult to dispatch aid. And there's always the risk of resources falling into the wrong hands. The solution is a global ceasefire, but world leaders have repeatedly failed to approve this proposal. They are invariably party to the struggle. More importantly, are politicians even interested in eliminating poverty? One thing is clear, all the sloganeering works. The promise to end poverty is the ultimate stump. But if the poor are rescued, what do you make promises to? Who do you make promises to? Politicians love pretending to be champions of upliftment. That poverty exists works to their advantage. So every time there's an election around the corner, poverty is back on the docket. Leaders visit shanties that would otherwise disgust them, distribute food that they would never eat themselves. It's a playbook as old as politics itself. Wooing the poor is a classic poll strategy. Since poverty is so widespread, the poor inevitably form a sizable vote bank. Offer them hope and their support is yours. The story of global poverty is a story of rising inequality. From 1990 to 2015, giant strides were made. Extreme poverty fell from 36% to 10%. In almost half the world's nations, the poverty rate dropped below 3%. But regional disparities grew. Nowhere is this more visible than in Africa. Even with maximum intervention, poverty will remain in double digits here. Once every 2 decades or so, the world will encounter a catastrophe like the Wuhan virus pandemic. This will derail anti-poverty measures. Poverty is a menace that fights back. Economists often call it the vicious cycle. The more we delay this global offensive, the bigger it becomes. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Coming back to China and why it is using poverty alleviation as a fig leaf. It's trying to hide a genocide in Xinjiang. The persecution of Uyghur Muslims living in this Chinese province has caught the world's attention. We've been reporting on how China has been slapped with the charge of genocide by Canada. And tonight I'm happy to tell you that the international pressure is only growing on Beijing. From France to the European Union to the United Nations to human rights bodies, everybody is raising questions against China and its handling of Uyghur Muslims. And along with questions, there are also calls to relocate the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics. Here's a report.
A genocide is underway in China. On target are the Uyghur Muslims. For 4 long years, WION has carried countless reports on their condition, and now the world is finally speaking up. On Tuesday, Canada's House of Commons slapped China with the charge of genocide. Now France too has spoken up. The French foreign minister has slammed the institutionalized repression of China's Uyghurs. Speaking by video link at the UN Human Rights Council, Jean-Yves Le Drian said that evidence from Xinjiang points to unjustifiable practices towards Uyghurs.
From the Xinjiang region of China, we have received witness accounts and corroborating documents that point to unjustifiable practices against Uyghurs and a system of large-scale surveillance and institutionalized repression.
Joining France in slamming China's persecution is the European Union.
Excellency, you now have the floor.
We reject the legal pressure.
Josep Borrell, the foreign policy chief of the EU, has called on China to allow meaningful access to Xinjiang.
Once again, we urge China to allow meaningful access to Xinjiang for independent observers, including High Commissioner Bachelet. This is key to enable an independent, impartial and transparent assessment of the grave concerns that the international community has. The European Union's call on China to comply with its obligation under national and international law to respect and to protect human rights, including the rights of persons belonging to minorities in Xinjiang, in Tibet and in Inner Mongolia.
The condemnation comes amidst this new report by the Human Rights Watch, which exposes China's groundless persecutions, its long prison sentences for Uyghurs, arbitrary detentions, and unlawful political education. The Chinese Foreign Ministry was quick to label the report as prejudiced.
The organization you mentioned has always been full of prejudice on issues related to China, often spreading false statements to smear China, and their allegations should not be trusted.
China may be trying to push back, but its crimes are too obvious to whitewash. The implications could be severe. Last we checked, calls to move the 2022 Winter Olympics away from China were growing exponentially. A number of Canadian opposition leaders want China to be stripped of the rights to hold the Games. There's a growing fear that the Games could further enhance China's soft power and validate its authoritarian system. Beijing cannot afford to let go of the Games. It has a whopping $3.9 billion budget set for the Olympics, split venues across several cities, and plans to secure at least $800 million as marketing revenue, with around 80% of it coming from sponsorship and ticket sales. The stakes are quite high. China's global reputation abysmally low. As the world looks for ways to punish China, the cancellation of Winter Olympic Games could be a good start. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Practice what you preach. This is India's message to Turkey, a country that loves to preach the world on what's right and what isn't. A country which, in tandem with Pakistan, has kept the rhetorical fire on Kashmir alive at global platforms. Up until now, New Delhi responded to Ankara's adventurism, keeping bilateral ties in mind. But this time, it pulled no punches. Let's tell you what happened. On Monday, the United Nations Human Rights Council began its 46th session. The foreign minister of each country took turns to speak. India's External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, spoke about terrorism, the pandemic and vaccines. America's Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, spoke about democracy, peace and stability. And the Turkish Foreign Minister decided to score a self-goal. He spoke about Kashmir. Mevlut Çavuşoğlu, that's what he's called, tried to target New Delhi over the Kashmir issue. He claimed that India was trampling on the rights of Kashmiris, but he made no mention of Pakistan's state-sponsored terrorism in the region. The Pakistani embassy in Turkey could not be happier. It tweeted the Turkish foreign minister's speech. With the collusion evident, India decided to hit back. Seema Pujani, India's second secretary at the United Nations, did not mince words. She reminded Turkey of the UNSC resolutions on Cyprus. And in case you haven't followed Turkey closely, this is what it's about. Turkey occupied northern Cyprus in 1974. In 1984, the UNSC passed a resolution on transferring the area to the United Nations administration. But despite repeated calls, the Turkish occupation continues. So India decided to raise that issue. I have that statement with me. It says, as regards the remarks made by Turkey, we find them completely unacceptable. It is ironical for a country which has trampled upon its own civil society to pass unjustified comments on others' internal matters. As far as the subject of UN resolutions is concerned, we would advise Turkey to practice what it preaches by first implementing those UN resolutions that apply to it. It's a very strongly worded statement, one that Turkey would do well to remember the next time it decides to target India at Pakistan's behest. That said, this is not the first time that Turkey has tried to target India over Kashmir. The Turkish president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, has never wasted an opportunity to raise the Kashmir issue. In 2017, Erdogan travelled to India, and ahead of his arrival in New Delhi, we interviewed him. You know what he told WION? He sought Turkey's role in the Kashmir conflict. He tried to intervene in a bilateral issue by suggesting a multilateral dialogue. And he said this just days before he was to land in India as a guest. This was just the beginning. 2 years later, in 2019, Mr. Erdogan spoke at the United Nations General Assembly and he said that 8 million people are stuck in Kashmir. He accused India of human rights violations. Then in February 2020, Mr. Erdogan travelled to Islamabad. He addressed a joint session of Pakistan's parliament and tried justifying Islamabad's cross-border terrorism in Kashmir. A few weeks later, he made a statement in Ankara, and listen to this carefully. He said, India right now has become a country where massacres are widespread. This is the Turkish president speaking. What massacres? Massacres of Muslims. By whom? By Hindus. How will these people make global peace possible? It is impossible. When making speeches, since they have a large population, they say, we are strong, but that is not strength. A country where the massacre of Muslims is widespread, says a leader who has clamped down on the rights of Kurdish Muslims in his own country. A leader whose mercenaries are murdering Muslims in Libya. All I'm trying to say is that Erdogan likes to be seen as a defender of Islam, as a leader of Muslims across the world, but he doesn't really practice what he preaches. He may have made Islam the center of Turkish politics and the guiding line of Turkey's foreign policy, but it's all a political stunt. Ask the Uyghur Muslims of China. It's a tool to keep his power intact. The Turkish economy has become a roast. Trade deficit has surged to 154%. The lira lost 20% against the dollar in 2020 alone. The possibility of European and American sanctions still looms large. Erdogan has picked fights with neighbors and allies. His friends are now Pakistan and China. And now he brings up Kashmir to keep his domestic audience happy and to keep his allies like Pakistan pleased. Too bad he cannot fool the rest of the world. The dream run could soon be over for tech giants in India. The government of India has unveiled a new set of guidelines. Content will now be regulated, dispute resolution will be swift, and troublemakers will not be protected. This is India's playbook to rein in big tech. It's a template that you will see probably more and more countries adopt in the days ahead. Our next report gets you the big takeaways of India's new digital regime.
The social media platforms, upon being asked, will be required to disclose the first originator of the mischievous tweet or message, as the case may be.
The battle lines have been drawn. After more than a decade of unchecked expansion, the walls are closing in on tech giants. The latest blow was dealt by India. New guidelines have been introduced, tough ones, to rein in the likes of Facebook and Twitter. 3 months from now, the new digital regime will take effect. It will make the Indian state a stakeholder in content regulation. The full draft is yet to be released, but a few provisions stand out. First, removal of objectionable content. Complaints will have to be registered in 24 hours, following which there is a 15-day deadline for redressal. But if the content is highly provocative or hurtful, it must be taken down in 24 hours. These complaints will be compiled by a grievance officer who must reside in India. All social media companies will have to produce a monthly compliance report. How many complaints were registered? In how many cases was action taken? Plus, they can't protect the troublemakers anymore. If an Indian court or the government wants to trace content on social media, the companies will have to take names. Where did the objectionable content emerge? Which accounts amplified it? Information that they have always denied. Big tech does not have a fixed yardstick. In Europe and America, they often submit to government scrutiny. Elsewhere, they run riot, stealing private data and fueling propaganda.
सभी सोशल मीडिया का स्वागत है, लेकिन बड़े आदर से कहूंगा, there should not be double standards. If an attack is there on Capitol Hill in Congress, then social media support the police action. But there is an aggressive attack on Lal Killa, the symbol of India's freedom, where our Prime Minister swore the national flag. You have double standard. This is plainly unacceptable.
There are new rules for streaming services as well. They will be overseen by a self-regulatory body headed by a retired Supreme Court or High Court judge. The content will no longer be one size fits all. There will be 5 categories based on age: universal, age 7+, 13+, 16+, and adult. There will be an exhaustive age verification process for adult content. These guidelines are, in a way, unprecedented. In most parts of the world, social media is internet's wilderness, a land beyond laws. For years, tech giants have fought against checks, but now the movement has gone global. Compliance is the only option. Facebook's reaction to the new guidelines says it all. We have always been clear as a company that we welcome regulations that set guidelines for addressing today's toughest challenges on the internet. Facebook is committed to people's ability to freely and safely express themselves on our platforms. India's new guidelines could become a global playbook. One thing's for sure, tech giants are no more the darlings of the internet. But the question is, can they avoid becoming its scourge? Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Our next story is from Sri Lanka. The land of serendipity is facing global scrutiny over human rights violations. The ongoing UNHRC session has put the spotlight on war crimes in Sri Lanka. Colombo is looking for support. A total of 18 countries have pledged to speak on its behalf. India faces the dilemma of picking a side. Let's tell you what's happening. It began exactly a month back. On the 27th of January, the United Nations Human Rights Commissioner, Michelle Bachelet, came up with this report. It warned that Sri Lanka is at the heightened risk of human rights violations being repeated. It spoke about increasing militarization of governmental functions, ethno-nationalist rhetoric, intimidation of civil society, and obstruction of justice for those on trial for war crimes. Now, this month, the UN Human Rights Council kick-started its 46th session. On Wednesday, this report was raised. The Commissioner spoke about the failure to ensure justice for victims of armed conflict by successive governments in Sri Lanka. Listen to this.
President, this is a key juncture for the Council's engagement with Sri Lanka. As my report A/HRC/46/20 indicates, nearly 12 years after the end of the armed conflict, domestic initiatives have repeatedly failed to ensure justice for victims and promote reconciliation. Despite commitments made in 2015, the current government, like its predecessor, has failed to pursue genuine truth-seeking or accountability processes.
Sri Lanka wasted no time in responding. Dinesh Gunawardene, the Foreign Minister of Sri Lanka, said the report was politically motivated and that his country was being subjected to quote-unquote unprecedented propaganda campaign.
The trajectory that has emerged with regard to the recommendations and conclusions reflects the preconceived, politicized and prejudicial agenda which certain elements have relentlessly pursued against Sri Lanka. These recommendations are based on ill-founded allegations. Sri Lanka categorically rejects the conclusions and recommendations in the High Commissioner's report.
This was followed by statements from several UNHRC members. America slammed Sri Lanka for marginalizing minorities. Pakistan said Sri Lanka had been a victim of terrorism. China said Colombo had always protected human rights. Imagine that certificate coming from China. Iran, the Maldives, Egypt and a host of other countries took turns to speak on the matter. Last we checked, a total of 18 countries had pledged support to Sri Lanka. Does the list include India? Before we tell you India's stance, you must know this. Colombo has been trying to get Delhi on its side. According to reports, the Sri Lankan president recently wrote to Prime Minister Narendra Modi seeking support to back a possible UNHRC resolution against his country. He doesn't want a repeat of the past. Similar resolutions have been raised in the past, and New Delhi voted against Sri Lanka in the year 2012 and abstained in 2014. What about this time? Well, India has not really made its stand clear. India's representative to the United Nations, Indra Mani Pandey, has taken a balanced approach so far. In his address, he said New Delhi supports Sri Lanka's unity and territorial integrity, but it is also committed to the rights of the Tamil community, along with justice, peace and dignity.
India's consistent position rests on two pillars: support for Sri Lanka's unity and territorial integrity, and abiding commitment to aspirations of the Tamils of Sri Lanka for equality, justice, peace and dignity. These are not either-or choices. We believe that respecting the rights of the Tamil community, including through meaningful devolution, contributes directly to the unity and integrity of Sri Lanka. Therefore, we advocate that delivering on the legitimate aspirations of the Tamil community is in the best interest of Sri Lanka. We call upon Sri Lanka to take necessary steps for addressing such aspirations, including through the process of reconciliation and full implementation of the 13th Amendment to the Constitution of Sri Lanka.
This was a very carefully crafted statement, keeping the current geopolitical realities in mind. Like we've been reporting, Sri Lanka has been swaying to Chinese tunes again. Last month, it scrapped some terms of a trilateral agreement to develop a terminal at the Colombo port. It is renegotiating the terms of agreement with India and Japan. At the same time, it is welcoming Chinese investments with open arms. A Chinese company has won the contract to set up a hybrid wind and solar energy project, one that is quite close to Indian borders. It is being built off the northern Jaffna Peninsula, barely 50 kilometers away from the Tamil Nadu coast. Then Colombo rolled out a red carpet for the Prime Minister of Pakistan, giving Imran Khan another platform to target India on Kashmir. And after all of this, Colombo expects New Delhi to speak on its behalf. We'll have to wait and see which way the chips fall. After all, geopolitics is not a zero-sum game. And now time for some good news. New Delhi's one step closer to getting Nirav Modi back, the fugitive diamond merchant who looted India. A magistrate's court in the United Kingdom has ordered the extradition of this scam-accused tycoon. The court has said that there's prima facie evidence of fraud and money laundering. What does this mean for Nirav Modi? Is his extradition now a done deal? What are the potential challenges? And how long could it take? Also, what does this say about the Indian government's war against corruption? Here's a report.
In 2018, he fled India after a $2.81 billion scam. In 2019, he was arrested in London and lodged in prison. In 2020, he threatened to commit suicide, citing depression and threats. In 2021, his bluff has been called out. This scam-accused tycoon has lost a court battle in the United Kingdom. The 2-year case has concluded. The verdict is in India's favour. The court has ruled that it is satisfied with the prima facie evidence of fraud and money laundering. It is categorically stated that Nirav Modi had clear links with other connivers in faking bank statements, that he wasn't involved in a legitimate business or made any genuine transactions. that he conspired to destroy evidence and intimidate witnesses, and that there's no proof that he won't get justice if he is sent back to India. This order takes Nirav Modi a step closer to extradition, but it may take months to wade through appeals. The ball is now in the British government's court. The ruling will soon be sent to the UK's Home Secretary, Priti Patel. As the final authority to order an extradition, Patel will have 2 months' time to take a decision. As for Nirav Modi, he has only 14 days to approach a High Court. He can seek leave to appeal against the Home Secretary's decision. Any appeal, if granted, will be heard at the Administrative Division of the London High Court. But the chances of his appeals being accepted are thin. The charges against Nirav Modi are serious and incriminating. The diamond merchant will have to polish his drama skills further, because a barrack at Mumbai's Arthur Road jail awaits him. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Who is an employee? It sounds like a simple question with a simple answer, but it's not. You'll be surprised how complicated this is. Let me tell you a story. It begins in the year 2016. 2 Uber drivers in the United Kingdom took the company to court. Now, you know that Uber is an app-based cab service, an aggregator. These 2 drivers told the court that they worked for Uber. Uber said the drivers did not work for the company, that they were indeed self-employed. Now, you may ask, is that something to fight over? Guess what it is? You see, the moment you employ someone, you're expected to give him or her employment benefits. What are employment benefits? Minimum wage, annual leaves, insurance, and they vary depending on a country's labour laws. In the UK, for example, there are 3 categories of employment status. One is employees, the second is workers, and the third is self-employed contractors. Now, employees have the maximum protection. They also enjoy the most benefits, and the self-employed contractors have the least. So when this case came up in court, Uber stuck to its claim. So did the 2 drivers. This was a 4-year-long legal battle. And then the UK's top court said that Uber drivers should be treated as workers, not as self-employed individuals, which meant that they were entitled to a minimum wage and a holiday pay. This happened on the 19th of February. It was just the beginning of Uber's troubles. 4 days later, the company was fined in Italy. Again, over the same employment debate, Uber and food delivery apps were told that couriers are employees. They should be treated as employees. 4 companies were fined 733 million euros for breaching labour safety rules. The companies were told to pay the couriers social security and insurance and also give them adequate clothing, helmets, masks, scooters or bicycles. So 2 courts in Italy and Britain declare that Uber drivers and food app couriers are employees. Why should the rest of the world care? Because this sets a precedent. It's only a matter of time before such cases come up in another country. So now you know who is an employee. The next question is, why is this employee debate important now? And the answer is to avoid exploitation. Let me answer this question from an Indian context. App-based cabs and food delivery services have been around for some time now, and they have generated employment for thousands of people. Many have migrated from rural areas to drive cabs in cities. Driving an Ola or an Uber was very lucrative a few years ago. We all heard stories about people quitting their desk jobs to drive cabs, but the story slowly changed over the years. In 2017, some drivers approached a Delhi court and they said that the apps were exploiting them by not treating them as employees. Soon a video emerged of a Zomato delivery agent tasting food that he was tasked with delivering. I'm sure you saw this. And while all of us cringed, we overlooked the desperation in this video. In India, a food delivery agent employed by a Zomato or a Swiggy barely earns a few thousand rupees a month. They work long shifts in polluted cities during extreme weather, and yet they enjoy no benefits, no sick leaves, no insurance. They're called independent self-employed workers. But they aren't really independent. They do not enjoy the benefits of that status. In other words, they cannot take up multiple jobs. The app-based cab drivers can, the food couriers cannot. When the pandemic struck, many of these workers were fired without notice, without compensation. Their companies blamed the Wuhan virus, but fingers were really pointing at the downside of the gig economy. That's independent working. Today, the gig economy is worth over $3.7 trillion. Freelancing, working multiple jobs, working from home, all of this has been trendy since the pandemic struck. But what we do not realize is that such jobs have no cushions, they have no benefits. The latest rulings by the courts in the UK and Italy have also put employers in a fix. Not only will they have to shell out more resources now, they will also have to figure out how these resources are allocated. Many cab drivers work for multiple service providers. How do you determine which company is supposed to give them employment benefits? Also, will the drivers be able to serve the rest of the companies once they are categorized as employees by one company? Will the end result be in favor of the drivers, or will it create further troubles for them? What the industry needs right now is to come up with a new model to ensure that while companies survive, those working are also not exploited. Remember the snowstorm in Texas? There were some who believe that it was all orchestrated. The snowstorm was orchestrated. They say artificial snow was rained down on Texas on purpose. I'm not making this up. There are people who believe that it was all part of an evil plot. Some netizens say they have proof. And they also know who's behind it all. Take a look at this.
We live in a really foolish world. Wondering why we're saying this? Watch this. People are burning snow in the US to prove that the snow is fake. Thousands have embarked on this mission. Snowballs are being torched one after the other, with zero regard for science or sublimation. When fire hits the snowball, the snow turns from solid to gas. In other words, it disappears. But who will explain this to geniuses with smartphones? They insist the snow is fake, and it apparently was deliberately rained down on Texas. The power outage was deliberate. The blackouts were deliberate. The deaths and the damage all deliberate. The burning fake snow is evidence. Who is behind this so-called fake snow? Conspiracy theorists have found the villains. The government of Joe Biden and Bill Gates. The same evil Bill Gates who is supposedly behind the Wuhan virus. He also apparently inserted chips into Wuhan virus vaccines. Poor Bill Gates must be sitting somewhere wondering why me. Maybe because he promoted the idea of using weather control to check climate change. Gates is probably thinking he shouldn't have. Surely he must know that there's a school that absolutely absolves him and blames China instead. Only if these conspiracy theorists would rather expend the effort to make a cute snowman instead. Go back home, sit down with a cuppa and read some science. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
I think that's a good note to take a break. Up next, Gravitas Images. Thanks very much for watching.
WION now available in the United States. Download the app now.
WION, India's global voice. The channel that brings you the biggest stories from across the world through India's lens. Now available in more than 190 countries worldwide. Because we believe that the world is one. Watch us in Africa,